Order. I call Sir Bernard Jenkins to move the motion.
I beg to move. And Sir Christopher, it's wonderful to be under your chairmanship, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity for this debate. I represent, well, I don't represent, but I chair a group of MPs from Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. It's a cross-party group, and we are working to promote the Clean Power 2030 objective, but in a manner which we think will be delivered more cheaply and more quickly, because it is becoming increasingly clear that undergrounding high-voltage direct current cables is the way forward for the Great National Grid upgrade. Undergrounding will carry public consent, avoid delays, and therefore be cheaper, as well as being better for the countryside. Relying on new lines of pylons, indeed for the entire upgrade as currently proposed, will delay decarbonising the national grid because they arouse such hostility and they will end up costing more because of the delays. This debate is not just local, therefore. Decarbonisation is one of the great national challenges the United Kingdom faces. How this is achieved, how quickly and at what cost is an issue of national importance. NESO's Clean Power 2030 report is welcome, but it highlights the scale of the challenge. NESO, the National Electricity Supply Organisation, is very clear. Public support is critical to achieving these ambitions. Their response to the Secretary of State in their document, Clean Power 2030, warns about losing public consent. It is a significant threat to delivering these projects on time and within budget. And Flint and Sly, the Executive Director of NESO, made this clear on Radio 4 when the report was launched on the 5th November, the importance of engaging community support. He said, and I quote, "I'm acutely conscious that building infrastructure, pylons, does impose on people and their locality." He also emphasised, what is really important is that we bring people and communities with us on this journey. The transition to net zero only works if we can bring society with us, unquote. So he's saying very clearly, infrastructure solutions must align with community priorities. The challenge to install new capacity is enormous. The UK currently has around 14 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. But to meet future energy demands, this capacity will need to grow nearly threefold by 2030 and to continue expanding to handle 125 gigawatts of wind by 2050. This is a much faster rate of investment than we have seen so far, but projects for 2030 are already falling behind. Given the strength of public opposition to overhead pylons, it is highly unlikely that any pylons proposals will be delivered on time. Clean Power 2030 sets out how delays are already affecting key projects like Norwich to Tilbury, which is the 184 kilometres of pylons through across Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. NESO now says this will be delayed by 1 year to 2031 in their Clean Power report. What's more, delay is very costly. NESO estimates that the cost of delay is £4 billion per year, far higher than previous estimates, mainly because of the constraint payments that have to be paid to wind power generators. Given the public opposition to Norwich to Tilbury, the funds being amassed for legal challenges, and the opportunities for judicial review at least twice during the process, Norwich to Tilbury is likely to be delayed far longer than just 1 year. This risk is likely to apply to the other 17 pylon schemes proposed in the Great Grid upgrade. Currently, however, National Grid plans to use overhead pylons as the primary infrastructure for this massive reinforcement of the national grid. And I do put it to the Minister, this is not deliverable on the current concept. The implication is clear. The way to secure public consent is by pursuing strategies that respect and protect local communities and what they value, their property, their livelihoods and the countryside. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend who has done a fantastic job in this area. He has been very persuasive in setting out the damage done to his own constituency, but does he agree that the strength of the Offset Group demonstrates that this is going to affect communities right across East Anglia, including Margaretting Village in my own constituency, and therefore the opposition he talks about is likely to be across the whole of the region and very strong?
Well, my right honourable friend is completely right. There are other colleagues present in the chamber today representing, for example, Lincolnshire, and we know there's concerns in North Wales, on the east coast of Scotland, represented by my right honourable friend on the representing the opposition front bench. This is a very widespread problem. The point is, though, undergrounding HVDC cables is not only technically viable, but it is also the most sensible and sustainable solution for the future of our energy network. That's if we can't have it offshore. And I do acknowledge that quite a lot is going offshore, but it does rub salt in the wounds in East Anglia that other countries are having the luxury of offshore schemes, for example, from Scotland to the north-east of England, but we're not getting it in East Anglia. For some reason, our countryside isn't worth the investment. I certainly give way, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, it's interesting listening to you talking about the delays that we have and the issues that we have with floating offshore wind. Do you agree that, does the Right Honourable Member agree that, in fact, we should be looking at why we have these delays? And after 14 years of Conservative government, one might have thought that many of these challenges would have already been dealt with. So would the Right Honourable Gentleman at least agree that many of the issues we have now was because of a lack of action over the last 14 years?
I will accept that the present government has inherited a planning system and a philosophy of upgrading the national grid that is out of date. And I think in government, the government was very, very slow to recognise that such a big strategic upgrade needed a proper strategy. And we started moving towards holistic network design. And we commissioned the Banner report from St Charles Banner KC to look at streamlining the planning process. And as I will be coming later on to my speech, if these streamlinings are put in place, and if this, I very much welcome what the government has commissioned, which is the spatial review of the entire network. I think this should have been done years ago. I think we were blind to the failings of the structure inherited from the 1988 Electricity Act, and we should have moved much sooner. But I mean, that should make it easier for the government to change the policy on the presumption in favour of pylons, which in the end, we said in our manifesto we would review, because the presumption in favour of pylons is out of date. Yeah. And I'm very happy for the Minister to blame the previous government for the difficulties he's facing and change the policy accordingly. Yeah. But I mean, it really is very odd. It really is very odd if the Minister comes to the dispatch box today to defend what the previous government was doing after what the Honourable Gentleman has said. But that, I suspect, is what he's going to do. I'm putting this forward in a very bipartisan approach. I honestly think that both sides of the House should be able to agree that the Great Grid upgrade was not going fast enough. We need to streamline the planning process. We need to speed up the delivery, but we need to also mend our ideas about how we deliver it. Because, as I say, undergrounding HVDC is not only technically viable, it is the most sensible and sustainable solution for the future of our entire energy network. I certainly give way.
Thank you. To return to the point that you were making about international comparisons and other countries nearby perhaps having a presumption in favour of overgrounding, I wanted to draw attention of this House to the fact that Germany's opposition has recently said that using overhead lines instead of digging underground could save the country €35 billion. and in fact that German political parties that previously backed underground cables as part of Angela Merkel's coalition have now called for overhead lines to be given priority. Would you agree that the picture is not quite so clear-cut on the mainland of Europe?
In response, I would say what is interesting about Germany, their presumption was in favour of undergrounding. So the idea that this is a great big experiment, we don't know what it means, there's plenty of expertise in Europe. Also, looking at cost comparisons of undergrounding and pylons, it depends on the territory you're going over and you're dealing with. The problem we've got here is lack of community consent. That is what Fintan Sly, the Executive Director of National Energy Supply Operator, says. He's perfectly right. There are swings and roundabouts and balancing things. But in particular, in the case of Norwich to Tilbury, the consequence of delays by trying to run roughshod over the public opposition, very, very widespread and well-funded public opposition of this, will be to put up the cost, and it makes the cost of undergrounding advantageous over pylons. That is the point I'm making. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the principle of what he says, but undergrounding DC cables has great advantages. Now, the latest estimated costs of just 1 year's delay for Norwich to Tilbury is 4 times more than the additional £1 billion cost of undergrounding HVDC. I hope the Honourable Gentleman was listening to that point, because that's the point. 4 billion a year for delay against 1 billion extra for the cost of DC undergrounding. I mean, I think this puts this into the field of a no-brainer. Why would we spend all that money fighting through the courts for a very unpopular scheme when you could save all that time and delay and legal expense by going for a different method? And undergrounding HVDC was set out in the ESO East Anglia Network study published earlier this year as alternative option 8. The great advantage of undergrounding HVDC is there will be far less public resistance. Moreover, as I say, the planning procedures could be streamlined according to the, as recommended to the government recently by Charles Banner, Lord Banner, to confirm possibly the same regime for the installation of new major water pipes. Because if we had the same scheme, if we had the same planning regime for water pipes as we did for undergrounding cables, so then we could speed up the process for undergrounding cables. HVDC offers scalable, future-proof solution that can be delivered with far less environmental impact and with public support, and much more quickly. Schemes without pylons that are already being planned by National Grid, for example in the northeast of England, are being delivered without public opposition or long delays. And that would seem to be an enormous advantage for the government's objective of decarbonising the grid. There is no comparable resistance from campaign groups. This is clear evidence that underground HVDC gets public support, making a far more practical and feasible solution. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'd also like to pay tribute to the hard work that he has done cross-party on this issue for many years, and I'm very grateful to be joining that as well as another East of England MP. That issue of public consent is just so important because the proposals here could have such a huge impact on local communities, and while developers suggest that, that they could be providing community benefits, with all due respect, the idea of having a community hall 5 miles down the road is not going to be something that is really going to mitigate against having massive pylons going past your back garden. And that's the problem with public consent, that those people who are very well organised will continue to kick up a fuss about this, and understandably so, and it will delay the aim of creating renewable energy that we absolutely need and we certainly support. Does he agree with me?
I'm very grateful for the Honourable Lady's intervention. She is the new Liberal Democrat MP for Chelmsford, and demonstrates that this is a cross-party campaign and supported by people who are as committed to decarbonisation as anything else. As she says, and as I was saying, there are no comparable resistance from campaign groups in the northeast of England. This is clear evidence that underground HVDC gets public support, making it a far more practicable and feasible solution. In East Anglia, the opposition to overhead pylons is not subsiding or giving up. It's becoming more intense and growing. And campaign groups are united in their resistance to this outdated approach to infrastructure. The government has made clear that local campaigners, and the Minister has said this himself, will not be able to block its nationally important mission to build clean energy infrastructure across the UK. Well, we're not blocking. We're trying to help. In my constituency, one local group wrote to the National Grid in response to a consultation saying, and I quote, "By all means, build closer to our houses and shorten the route. Just put it underground," unquote. This demonstrates that communities are not opposed to infrastructure itself or the objectives behind it. They are just against bad decisions to achieve it. I mentioned streamlining the planning system to bring it into line with what is required of water companies laying major water pipes. There is a massive underground Anglian water pipe being installed from Bury St Edmunds across my constituency into the constituency of my right honourable friend, the member for Whittam, to Abberton Reservoir. And this includes digging a trench through the very sensitive landscape areas of Dedham Vale across the Stour Valley, almost exactly where the pylons, or the pylons or the AC undergrounding will be going. Nobody's objecting to this underground scheme. I've not had a whimper of complaint about this pipe going in. Why stick to pylons when it is slower and delays will make it far more expensive? The government may argue, as the Honourable Lady for Chelmsford mentioned, that community benefits will compensate affected areas for the disruption caused by pylons. But the reality is that these ideas will not buy off the hostility to pylons and other unwanted infrastructure. Communities' solutions that respect their interests, as well as delivering for the future of our energy network, are the future. For Norwich to Tilbury, the onshore undergrounding HVDC proposal would cause significantly less environmental damage than overhead cables and AC undergrounding. And let me just enumerate that. For a start, the entire route would be underground, not just through the sensitive landscapes. The cable trenches required for undergrounding HVDC cables are far narrower than for AC cables. So the AC cables, AC undergrounding is what is proposed going through the area of outstanding natural beauty, the special landscape area that I share with my right honourable friend for South Suffolk. But that requires a 120-metre wide trench, because if we're undergrounding AC cables, you have to space them out. And that means a very wide swathe of destruction as this vast trench is dug and refilled. Everything in its path is destroyed. It's extremely expensive to avoid going through archaeology. The Stour Valley is an archaeological site of the same importance as Stonehenge. If there are bean stones in the Stour Valley, we would have a Stonehenge. They found evidence of a wooden henge. It was ancient tribes lived there in prehistoric times, and it was also a very significant area throughout the Middle Ages and Roman times as well. All that is at risk, as well as the massive destruction of trees and ancient woodland and ancient hedges in order to install AC underground cables. So I'm all for mitigating the effect of pylons by undergrounding it, but let's not kid ourselves that it's a solution to the most sensitive areas of landscape. And of course, it's much more expensive to underground AC cables than DC cables. I would very much like the undergrounding of the pylons proposal to be extended to other areas such as the Roman River Valley, which isn't technically in the special landscape area, but it's just a special countryside. And indeed, there is an obligation on the government to respect sensitive countryside like that, which could be another cause for a judicial review. But the solution would be much better if it was we weren't trying to underground AC cables through this sensitive landscape, but we were undergrounding DC. And another reason why this is so advantageous. Offshore DC to AC onshore demands huge DC AC converters at the cable endpoints. So every time a wind farm generating DC current lands at somewhere like Friston in the constituency of Suffolk Coastal, there has to be a massive DC to AC converter to put it onto the AC grid network. But if we started building a DC grid network, for example, that we ran all the way from Norwich to Tilbury on a DC line, all these connections could go straight into the DC network, avoiding the need for this extra infrastructure. And incidentally, Sir Christopher, that would apply to the interconnectors coming from the continent, like the Tarkon interconnector, which is currently proposed, arrives DC, then we wouldn't need a massive DC to AC converter at Ardley in my constituency. We could just have one DC to AC converter at the point at which the electricity needs to be converted to AC much nearer London, Tilbury, or even on the Isle of Grain. So, looking to the future, it's clear that HVDC is the right direction for many parts of the United Kingdom, not just East Anglia. Wind power stations are increasingly located along the coast or just off our coastline, and a DC transmission network should reflect that. Converting power to AC at landfall is inefficient and duplicative. By adopting a properly designed onshore and offshore HVDC network, we can reduce the overall infrastructure needed, cut down on converter stations, and focus on building for real demand rather than just peak production. Globally, HVDC is becoming the standard for modern energy networks. By investing in HVDC now, the UK can maintain its leadership in renewable energy, create jobs, and develop skills that will keep us competitive. The alternative is clinging to outdated mid-20th century technology, which will leave us falling behind other countries. And coming back to that point, Germany is not going to give up HVDC undergrounding altogether, but that's the presumption we have in our planning system at the moment, which I suggest the government needs to revise. The government must show decisive leadership and embrace an HVDC future. This is about more than just reducing costs or delays, avoiding delays. It's about ensuring we meet our renewable energy goals in a way that works for communities, the environment, and for the economy and for the planet. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the delivery of electricity grid upgrades. Polly Billington.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it is an honour to serve under your chairmanship. Chair, for me, this debate is an opportunity to talk about how we upgrade the grid in the best way possible, because currently, as indeed the Right Honourable Gentleman has said, the rules don't work. Despite being one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world and the most depleted in the G7, nature is not taken into account in our planning system. I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman's acknowledgement that there hasn't been the adequate reform of the energy system in the previous government. I am also struck that he mentions the legislation from 1988. I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been in this House since 1992, with probably the exception of me on this side of the House. Everybody here was at school, and I think that will be interesting to note that I've not seen that much enthusiasm, and having been an ardent monitor of both this House and energy policy more widely, to see him being quite so enthusiastic about energy market reform until this point. So I am somewhat sceptical, I have to say, Chair, about his new conversion to the idea that we need to change our planning system. I'm here to change the rules. I'm glad to see he is, but perhaps we need to agree on exactly the way we need to do that, because we need to preserve the nature we have while increasing efforts to restore nature. I give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Acknowledge it was the previous government that commissioned the Banner report.
I will
looked at streamlining the system. I mean, let's approach this on a bipartisan basis, that we're all on the same side, we're all trying to achieve the great upgrade of our electricity grid, and let's stop scoring party political points, shall we?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to be perfectly happy to acknowledge when the opposition is right, and I'm afraid to say on this one, they are not. We need to preserve the nature we have while increasing efforts to restore nature. This is one of our commitments in our manifesto, to restore nature by 2030 by 30%. This has to be taken into account with planning and national infrastructure projects. We will not reach our ambitious climate targets without this. I'm disappointed to see that there was no reference at all to the impact of this kind of infrastructure on that by the Right Honourable Gentleman. This will require a strong land use framework, we have committed to it, that intersects with an energy special plan, we have committed to that, and an updated national planning policy framework. I'm delighted that the Government is currently working on all three of these documents, and I look forward to seeing more detail on them. And it was interesting to see the Right Honourable Gentleman refer to the importance of public consent and support. And anyone who is aware of my work before I came to this place, public consent and support is absolutely vital for us to be able to do the transformation that we're talking about. But that also involves benefit for the communities, ownership and accountability of those communities to local in the form of local energy projects to help us build a more resilient grid. Yes, I will give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
As a former energy minister and therefore someone who has been involved in strategic energy policy, including introducing through the energy bill the capacity market, which is still a critical part of what is used today to determine where we get our energy, I just say to her that my long experience in this House, not as long as my honourable friend by the way, but fairly long experience in this House, is that public support for these things linked to public benefit is so often an illusion, because I've seen so many developers of all kinds, not just energy projects, all projects, who've promised great public benefits and they disappear like dandelion seeds on the wind.
Thank you very much. The Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and it's probably unusual, maybe certainly the first and perhaps not the last time when we will agree that developers end up having far too much say in these things and the community does not have enough. And I would agree with him that we need to talk about how we change that. But that is why it is an important part of the assessment of NESO and indeed of this government that 8 gigawatts of energy could be generated by local and community projects, reducing the need for further strengthening of the grid and enabling smart, local, flexible energy. That will increase our resilience and indeed build public consent and support if we stop the idea of developers simply trying to buy off local communities with either compensation or so-called spurious benefits, when instead we have proper locally owned energy projects. By putting energy closer to where it is used, it will alleviate stress on the grid, help to handle bottlenecks. And although it is crucial to point out that this needs to be done as well as grid upgrades, and the idea that grid upgrades won't happen is wrong. GB Energy will be crucial in helping to develop these projects across the country. I note the members opposite, of course, voted against GB Energy. I'd be interested to know how they think we're going to be able to achieve our goals without it, especially when the Right Honourable Gentleman mentions the vagaries of private developers and their ability to bulldoze over local communities. Locally led energy is going to be crucial in this, and GB Energy will be able to do that in embracing a locally led approach to building grid infrastructure. By integrating a focus on local place-based energy on energy projects, we can build the grid that we need by working with local authorities and communities across the country. A locally led approach is also crucial for building consent amongst local communities who want to see infrastructure built. The Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned that, but want to be included in how it is built. And that is why these rules need to be changed. I'm pleased to see that there is at least consensus on that. But we do need to understand that if you're talking about if we are talking about the risks around damage to the environment as well as public consent and support, we need to be aware that a significant amount of undergrounding is more damaging, both for our climate goals and for protecting nature, than some of the proposals when it comes to pylons. This is not a debate about if we upgrade the grid, it's a debate on how we build it, and I am assured that the government will be hearing my representations when it comes to combining our ambitions on a clean energy superpower with restoring nature by 2030.
Patrick Spencer.
Thank you very much, Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I put on record, first of all, that I and many others on this side hope and aspire for a clean energy future. But I want to make 3 points today that I think the government and this House should consider when contemplating the upgrade of our electricity grid. The first one, similar to the one made by the Honourable Member for North Essex. Are we basing our decisions on expedient technology of today or the ideal technology of the future? High voltage direct current is increasingly used across the world. It means only 6 instead of 18 cables. There are no heat issues, which means they can be closely spaced. Many other countries favour this approach over pylons. Here in the UK, National Grid itself has favoured this approach in Lincolnshire, concluding that it is cheaper, quicker and less risky than overhead lines. Relying on old-fashioned technology is increasingly a fool's errand. You see it in defence, you see it in social policy, and of course now you see it in energy. Can we allow for a moment, this is the second point, sorry, can we allow for a moment the notion that preserving our national heritage is a fundamental part of meeting our net zero commitments? We do this, after all, in other parts of policy. We demand... Sorry, I've lost my place. Can I take a moment? Apologies.
Judy.
Sorry. Sir Christopher, it's an honour to share under your chairship. May I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for HoC and North Essex on securing this important debate, which matters a great deal in his constituency and mine. And whilst there may be disagreements on how we make the improvements, it's great to hear a commitment to this from all sides. As we pursue ambitious goals to decarbonise our economy and expand green industries, we must confront an undeniable reality. The delivery of secure and cost-effective grid connections is not merely important, it's absolutely essential. The clean energy needs of green and decarbonising industrial clusters, particularly in regions like the North East, depend on reliable grid connectivity, and the problems that many are facing, unable to get connections or with significant delays to do so, are holding back growth. Without timely connections, we'll struggle to meet the demand for renewable energy, deter inward investment and miss opportunities to fully utilise key industrial sites that could be central to our future prosperity. Grid connectivity is essential, particularly in areas poised to lead the way in offshore renewables. Power supply to port and quayside sites, which are critical for the infrastructure underpinning the growth of offshore wind energy, are essential. The North East has the capacity to really lead the way in green, clean industry, but we're being held back from this due to grid connectivity delays and projects and investment. As outlined in the North East Mayor's response to the National Industrial Strategy Green Paper, national grid connections are central to offshore wind developers. They provide much needed certainty to private investors, manufacturers and supply chains, creating thousands of clean energy jobs. For many industries, particularly in the North East, the costs and long waiting times for grid connections are simply too high. The current capacity is insufficient to support the renewable energy generation that we require, and the delays in securing grid connections hold back business growth, leave sites underutilised when they should be driving forward our regional economies. Take Newcastle International Airport as an example. With a solar farm that already supplies 100% of its terminal's electricity on sunny days, the airport generates more power than it needs. They want to export their surplus electricity to the grid, yet they've been told that they cannot do so until next year at the earliest. Even then, they are informed that a full connection may not be possible until 2035, a full 10 years to wait. It is an unacceptable situation. The airport, like many businesses across the region, has been forced to delay millions of pounds worth of investment in sustainability schemes simply because they are uncertain as to when they will be able to connect to the grid. With a target of becoming carbon neutral by 2035, Newcastle International Airport cannot reach this goal without access to the grid. But it's not just businesses like the airport that are facing difficulties. Throughout the region, the barriers to grid connection are stalling industrial growth, limiting renewable energy delivery, and even restricting economic activity in rural areas where grid vulnerability remains a persistent issue. So, what is the solution? Firstly, the government's upcoming planning reforms need to be fully implemented to improve the ability for critical infrastructure to be approved. It's essential to accelerate the decarbonisation process and secure long-term energy stability. It's also crucial that the approval processes for grid connections are streamlined, cutting the time it takes to link key industrial sites to the grid. And secondly, we must have better coordination between the national grid, the Crown Estate, distribution network operators and the offshore wind supply chain. Cooperative working is key to ensure that delivery is timely and effective. In the North East, the Strategic Energy Board, established through the deeper devolution deal, is already addressing key grid challenges and their pressure points. By aligning businesses' future grid connection needs with regional planning, we can ensure that grid reinforcement happens in the areas that we need it the most, particularly at key industrial sites and renewable energy projects. Grid infrastructure must not only be viewed as a utility, it must be seen as a strategic tool for economic development. The North East can lead the way in clean, green energy production, but we need the grid infrastructure in place to support it. The government can act now to ensure that our grid can support both our industrial ambitions and our green objectives, driving the growth that is rightly at the heart of the government's agenda. Because this is not just about providing power. It's about jobs, it's about investment, and it's about the future prosperity of our regions. By working together and prioritising the needs of the grid, we can accelerate the transition to a cleaner, more sustainable energy system, boost growth, unlock the potential of our industries and provide those jobs of the future.
Hayes.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to speak in this debate. I'm going to speak about 5 things: the environment, efficiency, energy, economics and ergonomics. And I want to start by talking about the environment, because this debate is clearly couched in a critical and shared understanding that the environment matters. But what is the environment? The environment at a philosophical level is, in a sense, our connection with reality. It is our link to what is the natural world through the experience and the character of the places we live. And the places we live matter because they inspire us or disappoint us. They encourage us or they leave us wanting. And everyone deserves their chance to experience beauty. I make no apology for making the case for beauty. I've done so many times as a minister and as a shadow minister and as a backbencher. And everyone deserves their chance to experience beauty, because as Keats understood, beauty and goodness are inseparable. Beauty and truth are indelibly imprinted one upon the other. And so when we speak about these pylons, let's speak about the effect they have on the places in which people live. In Lincolnshire, and my constituency in particular, this row of huge pylons, as big as Nelson's column, in a flat landscape, will have a devastating effect on the vision, the vistas and views of not just the people who live in their immediate proximity, but people for miles away. You will see these structures across the flat fens for 5, 10, perhaps even 15 miles. That is just unacceptable. It's an imposition on a flat landscape which historically has never enjoyed tall structures, with the exception, of course, of the churches, and they were built to the glory of God. These pylons certainly are not that, and I don't think even this minister would defend them on that basis, their holiness, that is to say. So when we think of this immense row of pylons stretching down these coasts, let's understand their connection to the day-to-day environment, the things that affect people's local sense of well-being. And I hope the minister will recognise that for that reason, the more we can mitigate their effect, the better. Now, I happily can wait for my final friend.
Can I put on record my apology just for fluffing my speech a moment ago, and I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. One of the points I wanted to make is the recognition that we do take into account our natural environment when we look at housing policy and planning policy. And the reality is, when you want to build a development on the side of a village, or if you want to put an extension on your house, or if you want to expand our housing stock, planning authorities demand you take into account the natural environment, importantly the aesthetic, which you talk a lot about, and the preservation of our landscapes. Now, can I just leave it on one point?
Intervention, not another speech. Okay.
If they choose to solve the housing crisis by taking into account our environment, why can't we do that with energy policy as well?
Well, we can and do. Contrary to what was said earlier, the planning policy does take into account, the existing planning policy takes into account its effect on the environment. It's why we don't, for example, build things that are unsuitable in that series of natural beauty. It's why SSIs matter in the planning system and mitigate some of the things that you can do by them, in them and near them. And by the way, these pylons will run alongside one of the most precious natural environments in our country, the salt marshes that run along my constituency, which provide a site of outstanding importance because of the bird life that it sustains. A unique, I will in a second, a unique environment. So let's be clear about the need to mitigate all else in pursuit of maintaining those things which are already embedded in our planning system as highly significant, of the kind that my honourable friend in his pithy and powerful intervention suggested. I happily give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to ask the right honourable gentleman. He mentioned salt marshes, and indeed they are very much a unique environment. Whether he has concerns about the possibility of them being trenching through salt marshes, as opposed to pylons, which actually have less impact on the environment, and particularly the climate sink value of salt marshes, and therefore would he concede that there might be a need for us to reconsider the way we tackle fragile environments such as salt marshes, rather than simply trenching them, which has had long-term damage on those?
That's a good point, and it's why Lincolnshire County Council's submission to National Grid specifically takes account of what the honourable lady says, and indeed they suggest an offshore grid, but obviously one which avoids the problem the honourable lady suggested, and I recommend to her that she studies that submission. It is in the public domain, to show how you can offshore that grid without damaging the salt marsh in the way she suggests. I happily give way to my honourable friend.
The honourable lady raises a very relevant point, but there are balancing factors that once cables are undergrounded, they are maintenance-free, but pylons require constant maintenance, and therefore that adds to their carbon footprint. Secondly, well, how often come on, everybody has seen across it. And second, I'll just be very brief. And secondly, salt marshes are very often Ramsar sites and migration bird sites. You don't want overhead power lines interfering with migration of birds. We often see deaths of, say, scores of swans being killed on power lines because they're not very good at navigating these things.
With an insight for which my honourable friend is known, he's anticipated two of the points I was going to make. The problem with the pylons being so close to that SSI is the birds don't know boundaries. And, of course, the reason the salt marsh in Lincolnshire matters is because, exactly as my honourable friend said, the importance as a site for geese and duck in particular, and to run these pylons so close to that is at best highly contentious, at worst wholly destructive. And so the offshore grid that he describes can be run out further to sea. It is, of course, what we do with cables routinely. I mean, if you look at the ocean, if we were able to see the ocean bed around our islands, there are any numbers of trunked cables that run through them, which provide vital power and communications infrastructure, as read. I happily give way.
Thank you for giving way. There's an interesting discussion there about a balance of trade-offs. I mean, one of the other considerations is, of course, cost. and the cost of undergrounding is multiple times the amount of overhead pylons. The previous government was not able to demonstrate that they were able to do it at the same cost. So, how does the honourable gentleman balance that factor? And does he not consider that his constituents and constituents across the country might consider loading those costs onto them unacceptable?
Well, there's a big argument to be had about cost, because, of course, what we're planning here is a project that will last decades, perhaps even longer. You know, when I was the Energy Minister, I was very conscious of the fact that we were taking decisions that might be 100-year decisions. So it's very hard to gauge costs over time because of two things. Firstly, because of the ongoing maintenance costs associated with any line that runs above ground. And given the changing climate, it's likely that extreme weather events will become more frequent, and extreme weather events will have an effect on anything that's above ground. The second, I will give way to my honourable friend in a second. The second argument is that the relative costs of undergrounding and overhead cables vary according to the kind of cable you lay, as my honourable friend said. And indeed, some of the evidence from other places in Europe and elsewhere suggests the cost of underground cables is falling, trunking cables underground is falling, whereas no similar reduction in the cost of overhead cables, which on pylons have been at the same cost for a very long time indeed. The final point is about consent, that the longer these things take, the more they cost. And I can tell you that certainly in Lincolnshire, I imagine it's true in Essex and Suffolk and other places, there will be protracted legal challenges to this, whereas undergrounding with local support and the support of the local authorities, like Lincolnshire County Council, would of course be a much more straightforward affair. And factoring in those costs, again, is complex, but needs to happen. I happily give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Just very briefly, in fact, the ESO review, East of England Network Review, demonstrated that, yes, there's a higher upfront cost for undergrounding of an extra £1 billion from Norwich to Tilbury, but in the longer term, it saves money. In the longer term, it saves money. So it's just not correct to say undergrounding is automatically much more expensive. This is a departmental mantra that is now discredited. Just read the ESO and NESO documents.
So that's the point. That response to that intervention, and he's been very generous in giving way. Can I just say that this debate has to move on to the front bench speakers at 10:30, and there are many people who wish to participate. I haven't imposed time limits. All I'm just saying is that there are 30 minutes left, and there are probably 7 people who want to speak.
Well, on that basis, Sir Christopher, I won't give way again. As you noted, I've been immensely generous, and I will abbreviate my remarks without missing out any of the other 4 subjects which I promised to speak about. And so let me deal with them very rapidly. Efficiency is critically important in delivering energy policy, and as I've already said, if we want to get that policy pursued, delivered quickly, then we need an approach which avoids the protracted debates and disputes that I described. Let's speak a little more about energy policy more strategically. The Honourable Lady made a powerful point on this. We really do need to understand that bringing supply closer to demand is vitally important at a strategic level. Successive governments have failed in this, and a lot of people have made comments about the previous government. The previous government would have done a lot better if they'd listened to me more often. So I hope this one will. And then they won't go wrong. It is very important to reconsider that relationship between supply and demand. No government has done that with sufficient vigour, and I hope this one will. On the economics, putting these pylons would also have a displacement effect, because Lincolnshire is perhaps the most important county of all in respect of food production. About 30% of the fresh produce we consume goes through my constituency, I understand. South Lincolnshire produces 20% of the vegetables we consume, 20% of the sugar beet, and so on. Displacement effect of energy infrastructure, including pylons, also solar, will have a devastating effect on food production and therefore food security. And I simply say to the Minister, energy security must not be made the enemy of food security and vice versa. And finally, And that's why the economics of this are more complex than they perhaps first appear. And finally, the ergonomics of government, the cognitive ergonomics, I mean, is really important that in winding up, the Minister assures this chamber that the departments across government are working closely together. We've talked about land use studies, and that is a good thing. But it's really important that given the commitments the Planning Minister has made to beauty, given the commitments the Environment Secretary has made to food production and food security, that we don't simply pursue a policy which is invidious because it contradicts the other priorities of government. And my long experience as Minister in a variety of government departments is lateral thinking in government is a rare and precious thing, and I simply recommend to him a more lateral approach in combining those critical priorities. Thank you, Mr. Sir Christopher. May I just say this as a sentence to end what I have to say? My honourable friend is right. We need to approach this in a bigger than partisan way, because we're speaking about fundamental decisions in the interests of our country. This is a matter of national interest, but it doesn't have to be a matter of national interest which compromises the common good.
I have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will speak briefly because I know many of my colleagues wish to talk. And look, I would absolutely echo the comments made by the right honourable gentleman earlier. Yes, this doesn't have to be a partisan issue, but equally we also have to acknowledge the situation as we find it and not this fantasy of what we wish it to be. And the reality is we've had 14 years where decisions could have been... No. You say here we go, but it's absolutely relevant to this debate, okay? Absolutely. Yes, you passed the Bannister report. Well done. That's the big achievement in the last 14 years. This was a fundamental opportunity over the last decade to recognise where we were going as a country and what we need to do. Those decisions were consistently kicked down the line, and now we're here. So the window of which we have to operate in is incredibly narrow. We have 5 years, essentially, to meet the transition which we have to do. So the idea that we're going to delay, and yes, underground cabling will cost more, but also there's a significant time delay on it too. It's not a 2030 time frame, it's a 2034. And let's not get over to the fantasy of some magical offshore grid connection that's going to solve everything way cheaper and way quicker. It just doesn't exist, and I think we actually have to be honest with people. On the opposition point, absolutely. There's always going to be opposition to any sort of development we see. And look, I've grown up in Suffolk. I know there will be opposition to the grid upgrades which we're seeing. There's opposition to the solar farms in the Western County. Obviously, there's opposition to Sizewell Fitzy and things like that. But that can't get in the way of progress. And also, if you're the Green Party bingo card and you oppose all of them, well, we definitely can't go down their route either. This is a point about opportunity, though. There is an opportunity, Chair, if I can, to say that we're going to be transitioning to renewable energy to fulfil our mission to, and our guarantee to working people that we made at the last election. This is our opportunity to seize the opportunity for greater energy independence, and it's an opportunity for us, like in my home county of Suffolk, to seize the opportunity to be world leaders in this energy transition. We can't keep going around the houses, dithering and delaying and pretending that this stuff won't happen. It might sound very good to constituents back home, but look, I grew up in that area. I won't in just a moment. I'll finish my point because it's directly related to you in central Suffolk. I will in a moment. I've just said so. But my point is we've already got pylons running through that part of the world. We have Mendlesham Mast, which can be seen from miles around. We have Airfield, big business parks, warehouses, farm buildings. We already have infrastructure in place. It's not horror at all. It's infrastructure that people desperately rely on. And you might want to live in this fantasy that actually costs don't matter, that there aren't trade-offs. Well, there are. And I would also finally say to the honourable gentleman who's spoken earlier, East Anglian and Fenlands, which you mentioned, really are quite critical. Because if we don't build the energy transition infrastructure that we need, guess what? There isn't a landscape. We'll be surveying everything from a boat. So that is the absolute reality, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman here.
The honourable member talks about speed and the need to do this quickly. Can I draw his attention to the work of Ben Flyberg, who wrote a book earlier this year, or in the previous one, called How to Get Big Things Done, in which he noted, having looked at infrastructure projects across the world, that less than 1 in 10 are delivered on time and on budget. And part of the problem is making the bad decisions in the planning process. and not making the right decisions. So if you want to get things done, take your time now and get the planning right.
I think the honourable gentleman has just actually made a case for why we've got to crack on and stop dithering and delaying. The history of doing bad things slowly and never being repeated is not an excuse to do nothing now. We can't afford to keep kicking this can down the road any longer. Our constituents cannot be carried on relying on to foot the bill for an inefficient, unstable energy system, which is exactly what we've inherited. So yes, we can be as bipartisan as we like, but we also, as I say, have to accept the reality that faces us. We cannot keep heaping costs onto our constituents, onto businesses, for failure to invest properly in this system. We have 5 years to do so. And so to conclude, Chair, because as I say, I'm conscious that I want to bring my colleagues in, this debate has illustrated the choice we face between two competing visions for the future. We can choose whether or not we're prepared to stand up for our Britain's energy security. We can choose whether or not we're prepared to throw away billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on fantasies that will never come to pass, or act now to slash bills. And we must choose whether or not we're prepared to destroy vast swathes of land, which underground cabling would do, and commit lasting ecological damage or not. And I know which I would prefer. I know what my constituents prefer, and I'm unapologetic about choosing opportunity over wasteful fantasy projects.
Ian Ramsey.
Thank you very much, Sir Christopher, and I really welcome the opportunity to discuss matters like this in Westminster Hall, where my experience is there's an opportunity to look at the issues and options calmly and without party political point scoring. This is an issue, the energy transition, that we must deliver at speed and with community inclusion. The upgrades to the electricity grid are vital for net zero, but how this is done will shape public trust. We can and must achieve rapid progress and meaningful community engagement. Now, my constituents in Waveney Valley, like much of East Anglia, face floods, droughts, farmland at risk of submersion, and they understand the urgency. They voted for action at the election. And the grid upgrade is essential to connect renewable energy capacity and end reliance on fossil fuels. Indeed, I've spent the last 10 years leading national environmental charities advocating for and advancing renewable energy, speeding up that transition and advocating for strengthening the grid. The question is how best we do that. And there are significant concerns over this pylon proposed route, as we've heard. Concerns about the impact on sensitive nature and heritage sites, including the impact on the rural landscape, impact on farming, on local traffic implications. These things are not just about convenience. We need to make decisions that are right for the long term and resilient for the future climate changes that we face. Now, I want to zoom out a bit on this, as other speakers have done, and talk about the overall climate emergency, climate breakdown that we're working to grapple. And we have seen in this House in Parliament over recent decades a broad consensus on the need for action to be taken. The Climate Change Act was passed with broad cross-party support. The 2050 net zero target was embedded by a later government with broad support across the House. We haven't had the broad consensus on the need for action as something that's been polarised in this country in the way that it has been, for example, in the US. And we need to maintain that strong support and avoid this issue being weaponised and become divisive for political point scoring. And we do risk that happening with this issue if we don't take people with us and if people are not heard. The energy transition must be done with communities, not to them. Communities need to feel engaged and heard to maintain their support. And people want to see that action taken. Speed and proper community consultation can go hand in hand. Indeed, they must. The best way to accelerate the energy transition is by communities feeling consulted with and involved from the outset. And if people believe that projects are imposed on them without proper engagement, it risks slowing progress and undermining trust in the renewable energy revolution that must happen. And that's why I want to see the time that we've got right now, since the National Grid consultation closed in July, and the long delay we've got until a planning application is expected, we're not sure at what point next year. That's a time when the other options can be properly considered. And that's all I'm calling for, is a proper consideration of all the options. National Grid has acknowledged that undergrounding is possible. It's doing that in 2 small sections of the route. But there remain significant concerns, as I've outlined. That my colleague knows that we're about to move to the front bench spokes, so I would like to finish my points, please. So these points do need to be properly considered, and the alternatives need to be properly addressed, both undergrounding more or all of the route, as has been heard today, or an offshore grid. And these things are things that are being done in other countries, and indeed a National Grid 2020 study indicated that an integrated offshore approach could be more cost-effective than piecemeal alternatives. So that's why all of the options need to be properly considered, and constituents need to be listened to. People who are saying that they feel let down. One of my constituents said, so far we've been subjected to a series of lies called NIMBYs and told our rural area is unimportant. Others have said that there's a failure to engage the community and failed to prove the pylons are better than most other sensible alternatives. They want government to start listening. So in conclusion, the rapid deployment of renewables must happen. The principle is clear. Decisions about infrastructure must be made with communities, and we must maintain and build public trust, and all connectivity options must be properly assessed. My constituents are keen to support the energy transition, but they need respect, consultation, and to be shown that the impacts are properly considered and any compensation packages clearly set out. The energy transition is not a choice between speed and community support. With thoughtful planning and meaningful engagement, we can and must achieve both.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I commend the Honourable Member for Harwich and North Essex for securing this debate. And I thank all of those attending, and it's good to see representation from most parties. Let me start by with the good news that there is considerable consensus in the room despite a couple of testy exchanges. Members from across the House have agreed that decarbonising our electricity generation is critical to meeting the UK's contribution to tackling global climate change. And a less centralised and more distributed electricity network is also essential for economic growth and helping our various businesses and homes to continue to have power. Members for East Thanet, Ipswich, Cramlington and Killingworth and Waveney Valley have all, as well as the Honourable Member for Harwich and North Essex, have all very well articulated the decarbonisation challenge. Members have also agreed on the need for a planning system which strikes that right balance between national needs and local voices. And I think this is a recurring challenge that comes up in so many debates in our House, and I'll come back with some thoughts on those shortly. It is welcome that the new Labour government has committed to delivering, and I quote, the largest upgrade to our national clean energy infrastructure in a generation, and it is in all our interests that they succeed, particularly as the member for Harwich and North Essex himself conceded, in the context of previous Conservative government not acting with anything close to the speed or ambition that this challenge demands. But we have seen from past goals, such as that of the previous government for ending the sale of full combustion engine cars by 2030, as originally targeted, that aspirations will remain lofty ideas without a solid plan to achieve them. And in that context, we see that around 40% of projects face a connection wait of at least a year, according to National Grid's own figures. And 75% of energy sector experts, according to Electrical Review, identify timely grid connections as the principal obstacle impeding the growth of renewable energy in the UK. It's therefore essential that the government shows the leadership needed not just to upgrade our electricity grid and enable its decarbonisation and value for money for consumers, but tackles in a sensitive and inclusive way this repeat challenge that we see about the balance between the voice of local communities and national objectives. The member for Harwich and North Essex articulately highlighted the role of community consent and engagement in delivering the infrastructure that we need, although I would assert that his figures on the costs of buried versus overhead are somewhat disputed by a number of sources. From the Liberal Democrat perspective, we of course also want to see the electricity grid network reformed to support businesses' transition to renewable energy sources and to permit local energy grids to supply power to communities who need it most. We would support the expansion of the grid network through a strategic land and sea use framework to facilitate an optimum balance between electricity generation, food production and nature recovery. And the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings and the Member for Waveney Valley have both articulated that challenge of ensuring that we balance the demands on our land and we use it appropriately. Liberal Democrats, we would like to see more in terms of a rooftop solar revolution by expanding incentives for households to install solar panels, including a guaranteed fair price for electricity sold back into the grid. And we believe that upgrades to the national grid are essential to ensure electric vehicles are cheap to charge and an accessible step in making everyday lives more sustainable. Making schemes for community benefit from new infrastructure compulsory will be essential for getting local buy-in, and we have tabled an amendment to the Great British Energy Bill to that effect. And keeping energy bills affordable at a time when many are struggling to pay their current energy costs. That's particularly important in the context of government cuts to winter fuel payments and the forthcoming 1.2% increase to the energy price cap. So the Labour government needs to take more radical action to ensure consumer energy bills remain affordable. But as a number of members have said, consent and dialogue are essential. And I particularly applaud the observation by the Honourable Member for Waveney Valley that needs to be more than just a technical process of consultation. It is important to build trust and dialogue so people really believe in that process. I face some of these challenges in my own constituency of Didcot and Wantage in Oxfordshire. Thames Water proposed to build the second largest reservoir in my constituency, claiming that studies suggest it is needed to meet long-term water demand. And a key challenge that I face is that my constituents simply do not trust Thames Water's motives, and they do not trust Thames Water's ability to deliver such a large scheme. But it is a strong illustration of this challenge between national goals and local concerns. I don't have the answer as to how we strike that right balance, but it is something that we all need to think about, and particularly the new government. And I call on them to not perhaps think that their unassailable majority in terms of seats should give them the power to override those concerns. Perhaps they should think more in terms of their vote share and recognising that many people were not bought into that government, and therefore it is important to have that dialogue and to find the right balance in planning process between national goals and local. My constituency has seen huge population growth in recent years, with more than 4,000 further homes planned for Valley Park near Didcot. The science and technology sector has a major presence at Milton Park, Culham and Harwell campus. Harwell campus has a major current and future demand for electricity, powering globally important synchrotron and neutron beam equipment and spin-off businesses. In these contexts, confidence is needed that future affordable energy supply will indeed happen. If the electricity grid is upgraded, local and community energy projects can provide even more help, and if they are community-owned, can at least help with that challenge of getting local buy-in and may have a return on investment and businesses in local areas. Flexibility in local energy systems can allow local energy trading, meaning lower than market rates energy pricing, allowing more money in bill payers' pockets and reduced overheads for businesses. I'm pleased to see many examples of solar panel roof schemes in my constituency, but would like to see more, particularly on new houses. Thames Travel, Didcot Girls' School, Chiltern Primary, Hagbourne School, Furtree Junior School in Wallingford, and Malcolm Building, Ashurst Court in Sandford have all invested in solar panel roof schemes. And just outside my constituency, in Oxford West and Abingdon, the Sandford Lock hydroelectric plant uses Archimedes screws to generate electricity from the flow of the river, generating clean, renewable power for local community benefit. We need more such projects, and I call on the government to create the electricity grid and wider regulatory framework to empower our local communities to benefit from them. In conclusion, the key challenge that faces us is a national one, of the balance between national goals and hearing local concerns and getting local buy-in. Dialogue and ensuring things are done with, not done to communities are essential. And as I say, I hope the government will not let their majority go to their head on that, but will engage in the challenge of getting that effective and consenting planning process.
Goodbye. Thank you very much, Sir Christopher, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship here this morning. And of course, first I'd like to congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, for bringing this incredibly important debate to Westminster Hall this morning. Indeed, it's been a pleasure both as an energy minister, as a shadow energy minister, and indeed as a constituency MP with similar issues to not only have discussed these issues, to find a way through, but also to have shared notes on the experiences of communities that we both represent, and I know indeed are represented by many people in this room and beyond today. It's been good to see so many people attend this debate. I think it shows just the groundswell of feeling outside this chamber in terms of what we need to do, whether or not that's what we need to do in terms of upgrading the grid and making our way to our net zero future, a cleaner future. Everybody in this room acknowledging that we need to upgrade the grid in order to do that, or indeed representing those communities who are concerned about the pace of the direction of travel and the inability or the refusal of those in positions of power to consider alternative technology being considered at the minute. And of course, I would, as ever, be delighted to give way to my honourable friend.
Thank the honourable member for letting me intervene, but also and he said that all parts of the United Kingdom are keen to achieve and be part of this goal. Ever mindful of that? The fact that the renewable energy in Northern Ireland has reached 50%, but it has to have 80%. I know the honourable member is aware of this by 2030. That's 6 years away. Can the honourable gentleman agree with me when it comes to the scale, the pace and the complexity that there is a need for the whole of UK additional support and funding to reach these goals? That means Northern Ireland needs to be part of this process as well. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and he knows very well, I hope, that my commitment to our entire United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is just as firm as his, and that when I'm speaking about the United Kingdom, I am, of course, referencing Strangford and wider Northern Ireland as well in that. And, of course, there is a situation in Northern Ireland which is unique in that the number of homes that are actually off-grid far outweighs the number of homes on mainland GB that are off-grid, and that brings with itself its own complexities when it comes to decarbonisation and moving away from gas or oil boilers for heating and other such purposes. So I completely understand the unique complexities of decarbonising in a Northern Irish environment, and I think he's absolutely right. When the government comes to take decisions on UK-wide infrastructure projects, they should be cognisant of the unique situation that Northern Ireland finds itself in, being in an all-Ireland grid and also having so many off-grid properties. That's something that should never be far from our minds. I'd like to thank the member for East Thanet, Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, Cramlington, South Holland and the Deepings, as ever, with Ipswich and Waveney Valley for their contributions today. I didn't agree with all of them, but I think they were all very thought through. And I know that everybody in this room, from whatever perspective they come, on how we achieve a cleaner future, agrees that upgrading the grid is important. It's just how we go about that is the issue that is concerning us here today. My friend, the Honourable Member for Harwich and North Essex, eloquently highlighted the strength of feeling among people across the country that live in communities that are being asked to take on the burden of the proposals that are being proposed at the minute. I mentioned that we shared notes on this, and that is because, like my right honourable friend, my constituency too is facing the threat of huge energy infrastructure bills over the next few years. The genuine threat, as these communities feel, of industrialisation, sweeping rural landscapes, and the impact on the communities as a result of this. Now, in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, which is my constituency, the energy industry is omnipresent, is home to the subsea capital of Europe and on the edge of the oil and gas capital of Europe. Indeed, many of my constituency work in or have worked in the energy industry as a result. Many, indeed, involved in the design, construction or installation of underground or offshore pipelines for oil, gas or indeed electric cables. And in my constituency, if you dig deep enough, you will find national gas pipelines buried underground. The only indication of them being there are the little yellow marker signs on the surface urging people to beware and not to dig anywhere close. I say this because I want to stress that my constituents, and indeed so many others around the country who are coming to this issue, are not doing it because they're being needlessly obstructive. They're not doing it because they're being anti-net zero, and they're not doing it because they don't agree that the grid needs to be upgraded. They just know, due to their experience working in the industry, that there are other ways forward. And it is for this reason, and the overwhelming desire on our side of the House to exhaust all the options in our pursuit to find the best technology, and not, as the NISO report suggested, that we favour pace over perfection, at the best cost, that would deliver our decarbonised grid, but do so in a way that does not blight so many communities and our great British countryside. And that's why we committed in our manifesto to take a different approach. I thank you
for giving way. On this debate today, some talk about the importance of expediency. Would he agree with me that we uniquely live in a world in turmoil? that we see growing international threats, and that one of the surest ways in which Britain can protect ourselves against those threats is by being energy independent. And that as a consequence, we don't just need to move quickly to meet our climate crisis, our energy defences are down, and it's important that we're able to protect ourselves in the future.
I couldn't agree more. Indeed, I would long for a day that we are much more energy independent, which is why actually I take such issue with the party opposite's position on the North Sea, and indeed the willful destruction of our own oil and gas industry, leaving us open to further outside influence and reliance on hostile states moving forward, is one of the reasons why I think that we do need to increase our energy security. And it's why I actually agree with the honourable gentleman. We do need to improve our energy security. This is not about whether we do that or not. This is about how we go about that. And if we make decisions now in the best interest long-term of the people and energy security of this country. I do not believe that the way that the government is proceeding at the minute is in the best interests long-term of the communities of this country. If we get this right and we work together, then we can get to a solution where communities feel that they have a stake in that energy transition, and that we can deliver the clean future and become energy independent. As I used to say when I was in the minister's position, that's a win-win-win, but we are a long way from that just yet. I mentioned briefly community benefits. It was last June that I visited, June 23, that I visited East Anglia to begin the consultation process on the community benefits process, and indeed it was on the 7th of December last year when the then Chancellor of the Exchequer stood up to give the outline for what the framework could be for a community benefits package. And I do wonder whether the Minister might be able to give us an update as to where that process is and where they had reached on community benefits, because, well, quite, where that process is, because regardless of the technologies that are selected, and regardless of whether these pylons and indeed associated infrastructure are built, and regardless of any right honourable member's view on this, communities out there do want to know what this community benefits package will be and what the trade-offs will be, and indeed what they will be receiving as a result of having to host this infrastructure in the national interest. So an update on that would be delightful. Yes, I'd be.
The issue of that we've heard a lot about with this community engagement and consultation, and it doesn't seem to me to be clear, despite the fact that all of us do a lot of community consultation and engagement through the process of democracy, exactly what is meant by it, particularly when it seems to me that in the way that people have been talking about it, we could quite well end up with a veto from a small number of people on a transformation of our country to increase resilience, reduce costs and tackle the climate crisis. Surely that is something the Right Honourable Gentleman would agree would not be desirable, and that is why we need to be able to change the planning process in order to be able to support the transformation we're looking for.
Well, whilst I respect the Honourable Lady's position and obviously welcome her intervention, I think it would be reprehensible. Indeed, it would be if honourable members elected to this House to represent their communities did not do so. And whilst for her it might just be a small number of people that are complaining about this, for many members of this House and indeed representatives and other legislators across the United Kingdom, there are huge numbers of people in communities that they represent who are very concerned about the impacts that these plans will have on their landscape, their land, their house prices and everything else that goes with this. And so it is incumbent on us as elected representatives of those people to bring those concerns to the House, to debate, to discuss, and then for a decision to be taken by the government, and whether we like it or not, a decision will be taken by the government in terms of the best way forward, which is why I asked about community benefits. The consultation to which I referred a second ago was a consultation specifically on community benefits package, and whether or not we might be seeing more detail on that in the near future, and whether or not indeed it might be statutory and not, or not, because I know this was something that was being looked at by the department and has been being looked at for some time. I've got very little time, but I will.
Thank you very much for giving way. The Honourable Gentleman mentions protecting landscapes, and I wonder if he thinks it's rather audacious for his party to refer to that, given they have, after 14 years, left us with nature targets that they failed to achieve, with still drilling for oil and gas, backing fracking for a significant amount of time, leaving sewage in our rivers and in our seas, and plastic bottles across the country because they refuse to implement implement environmental schemes on that front. So would he agree that he has a cheek to mention protecting the landscape? And would he further agree that many of his arguments today are a delaying tactic and we really need this power in West London?
No, I would not agree. In summing up, I would just like to say this before I conclude. There has been noticeable today, and there has been quite noticeable in discussions on this in the recent past, a certain tone being adopted by some members of the party opposite. And what I would say is this. Whilst we might disagree about the way to reach net zero, and while we might disagree about the way to best upgrade the grid, I would say that there are people out there and communities out there who are genuinely very worried about what this build and that these plans might mean for them and their communities. And I would urge all honourable and right honourable members to please engage in this debate with an element of respect for the views being expressed on behalf of those people and those communities up and down the country. I know this is something that the Minister recognises. Indeed, he is always engaged on this debate with due respect for those communities. But there are people who are concerned about the way forward and the pace at which this change is coming. And so on that, I will conclude my remarks. Please remember those people. Please consider other options. Please listen to these communities. And then we can bring people and the country together, and with us and everybody can contribute towards this transition, which we all agree needs to happen in the national interest.
Minister. Thank you very much, Sir Christopher, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the honourable gentleman for Harwich and North Essex for raising this debate today, and indeed for the approach that he's taken on this and the engagement that we have had on this topic in the short time that I've been in this job. And also, I think the context that he places on it, while we might disagree politically on, I suspect, a great many things, I actually think his repeated commitment to the need for net zero is important in this debate, and I think separates him from some honourable members in the House who might make this part of an excuse to avoid dealing with the issue of the climate. So I welcome that, and I was pleased to meet him and his colleagues recently to discuss this. Can I also thank all the other people who have contributed to this debate? Can I welcome the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine to his new role, not just in energy now, but I'll see him as well as Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland. Clearly he didn't have enough on his plate before. I don't know what it says about the Scottish group of Conservative MPs that he has two jobs. But anyway, we'll leave that to one side. Can I say, this has been a very wide-ranging debate this morning, although I confess I wasn't anticipating the right honourable gentleman from South Holland and the Deepings existential question this morning about the nature of beauty and the environment. I learned a lot from that, and I'll leave the theological debate about pylons to others in this House, I think. But I want to pick up on the general context of this and then some of the specific points that have been raised. When it comes to the security of our energy future, there are few matters facing us as a government more important than the delivery of network infrastructure. It was the very first meeting I had when I became a minister, and it has been the topic of, I think it's fair to say, almost every other meeting I have had in this job from a range of different people looking at this. Our network infrastructure is in dire need of upgrading. But I do recognise, and I'll start with the point that the Shadow Minister finished on, that the impact of the delivery of this, while important to our national infrastructure, will be felt on individual communities. That's the nature of this. I'll come to the honourable gentleman in just a moment. And so I do recognise that there will be communities right across Great Britain and Northern Ireland that will have to host energy infrastructure, and we thank them for doing that, and while recognising the importance of upgrading the infrastructure for the whole country, also recognise the need to get the balance right. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Minister very much, and the Minister is always incredibly helpful with any questions that I ask or anybody else, and I appreciate that and thank him for it. But for Northern Ireland to be successful, they need the support from government here nationally. The Shadow Minister has reiterated that. Can I ask the Minister for the record to perhaps say similar to that, as unanswered, and we in Northern Ireland need to be very much part of the strategy for the future. And for, as others have said, it's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We're always better together, but there's advantages. Let's see some of those advantages. Thank you.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. Me repeating better together is tricky in my political party sometimes, but I do reiterate my commitment to the whole of the United Kingdom as well. And he will know that I do take that very seriously, and I've had a number of meetings with the Economy and Energy Minister in Northern Ireland on this topic. Clearly, the role that I have is different in Northern Ireland, given the the transferred nature of energy policy in Northern Ireland and the whole Ireland grid, but I do take those issues very seriously and commit to that today. The delivery of a reinforced modern electricity network is critical for every home and every business right across the country, and it is a critical enabler for our Clean Power by 2030 mission, which is designed not just to deliver energy security, but also to deliver economic growth, skilled jobs, and what we need around the country around cheaper energy that this country so desperately needs. And in short, transforming the network underpins our shared commitment to energy security and to our prosperity and to the low-carbon future that this country needs. And it's fair to say that this transformation is, of course, extremely long overdue. The last significant modernisation of the grid took place in the 1960s. And through new investment of industries of the future, such as data centres, which will play such an important part in the economy of the next few decades, we need to deliver jobs around this, unlocking growth and jobs. But the electricity demand that places on us will increase, expected, by 60% in 2035 and then doubled by 2050. It's a significant issue. I'll give way.
Thank you very much, Minister, for giving way. I just wanted to bring to your attention the issues we're facing in West London. You mentioned data centres, and we've recently had a confirmation of investment from CyrusOne, which is a great investment in West London, but they've had to get their power from Enfield because there's huge constraints on the energy system in West London. So does the Minister agree with me that we do need to ramp up this work on connecting our grid to these new investments, and that we must not allow the tactics of the opposition, which are about trying to delay, trying to go back 14 years to decisions they should have made at that point and they never did, and that really the time now is to take action, and that we must not allow people to continue to have to pay higher energy fees than they should be paying, which is another aspect of this issue.
I do agree with my honourable friend on that point, and it is really important. We're seeing both on the generation side and on the demand side connection dates that are far too far in the future. And so right across the country we need to do what we can to build more of the network infrastructure, but also reform the way that we deal with connections at the moment, and that's work that is ongoing just now. So I want to just, I'm conscious of time, and I do want to give the honourable gentleman some time to respond at the end. We have heard today a number of points from honourable members about the impact on grid expansion in their communities. I want to make 3 key points. Firstly, I don't accept the point that the grid expansion is around riding roughshod over communities. It's important to say that communities will have a say in these projects. They will continue to have a say. And the second point I make is that I take a slightly less dismissive view than some honourable members about the importance of genuine community benefits. I think if communities host infrastructure and generation, they absolutely should benefit from doing that. And the work that is underway at the moment, which the Shadow Minister referenced earlier, which he quite honestly said the previous government spent a year on, and we have been moving in 5 months on as well, moving quickly to work out what that effective community benefit actually looks like. And we're developing guidance on what that would look like, particularly for hosting transmission network infrastructure, which we'll publish in due course. And secondly, on the point about modern technology, which a number of honourable members made, delivery of the network is underpinned by the latest in technology, tailoring it to locations that urgently need reinforcement. It relies upon upgrading existing power lines first and uses new and innovative strategic design and options to find solutions which balance the ecological needs, impacts on communities and, crucially, and I think one of my honourable friends made this point earlier, the reality of cost, which is important given that it's borne by bill payers right across the country. Members here will be under no illusion that we have to expand the network considerably. Rewiring from where we are at the moment is important, but we also need to connect to new areas of demand in the future. And that's why we have outlined our Clean Power by 2030 mission, of which we'll publish our response to the NESO's report very soon. It is around investment in renewable generation, including onshore and offshore wind, solar and storage, but there can be no transition to this clean power future without the grid upgrade to get it to where it needs to be. This work will take us to 2030, but actually, given what I've said about the increase in demand to 2050, this is work that clearly is going to have to continue far beyond that. I want to just pick up very briefly on one of the points about the NISO's advice on the cost of this. NISO's advice on the particular project in East Anglia points to the issue of whether it will be cheaper or more expensive. And I think a number of honourable members should review the NISO's advice slightly more carefully. And I would have got into some detail on this, but I'm conscious I've now got 40 seconds in which to wrap up. I think it is worth clarifying the fact that delays in delivering the undergrounding part of this have not been factored into some of the points that the honourable gentleman made earlier today. So in very briefly concluding what has been a very wide-ranging debate today, can I just make the point that we are on the edge of an industrial and energy revolution. We want to reduce bills and deliver energy security, and to do that we need to upgrade the grid infrastructure to make it possible. That will have to be hosted in some communities. We want to bring communities with us, but it will have to be built, and that's the commitment of this government.
And for the meeting he had with MPs, could he write to me very kindly with the further detail that he hasn't been able to put on the record today? But can I just point out that the only orange flag against HVDC undergrounding on the ESO review in the spring was about cable availability. It wasn't a red flag, it was an orange flag. And with streamlining of the planning process, this could be speeded up. It is a possibility, and I hope he will carry on in dialogue about this, because I think he's going to need this as a solution to the problems he's going to run into.
Order.